Good evening, everybody. And I'd just like to acknowledge that I am speaking tonight, as I do each week, from the land of the Cammeraygal people over here on the north side of Sydney. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and to their history in this part of the country and their wonderful culture of storytelling. And I'd also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal people who are watching this evening or may watch in the future. And I'd like to welcome all of you who are here tonight. Lovely to have you. So, look, tonight I'm going to talk about embracing fear. So this is tonight's topic. And I don't know how you feel, but I would see our world as very, very fear-driven at the moment, and probably for a very long time. And so I thought this would be a sort of relevant topic. And where does fear come from? Well, in a nutshell, and I'm going to go into this in some length tonight, because we really need to understand fear and where it comes from in order to allow it to go away, to set it free. So in a nutshell, fear is the very fabric of the ego. And I will talk about ego as a construction of self. It is a false construction of self. And, you know, I describe the soul as life force or energy. And everything about us, apart from, well, our body is also energy. It's filled with energy, with our life force. The ego is energy. The soul is energy. Our thoughts and feelings, our ideas, our reactions, our responses, everything is energy. It is a thing, a living thing. Our feelings are living things. Our thoughts are living things. They're not no thing. And so I'm also tonight going to discuss an idea which is used in what I'm going to call the work. And the work, as far as I'm concerned, is what we carry out on our spiritual journey, on our journey from not really understanding the self at all to developing complete self-awareness or soul consciousness. So it's that journey from body consciousness to soul consciousness. And so during this journey, we confront in a very direct way the many, many false ideas we have about who we are. I remember many years ago, I was working with somebody, one of my therapy clients, and she came to the door of my counselling practice one day. She was quite disturbed, And I opened the door and she looked at me and she said, "Who are you? Who am I? And why am I here?" And I said, "Well, what fantastic questions. Come in." And I had been working with this woman for months, for a number of months, quite a number of months. I can't remember how many, but it was more than like a brief time, much more than that. And so this idea I'm going to bring up today is called the theory of holes. And in this construction of false self or ego, which, you know, the fabric of the ego, as I say, is fear. It's what it is. But it develops from our early childhood. And for instance, when we come into this world as an infant, as a new infant, our consciousness is tiny, tiny. And why is it so tiny? Because our brain is only really beginning to develop. We don't have our cognitive brain online, like our thinking brain. We have feelings. Babies have a very broad range of feelings and emotions, but not a whole lot else. And so over time, you know, a baby comes into this world really very soul conscious. The baby doesn't know it's a body. It has no idea. It takes months, you know, before baby will sort of start to realise it actually has control over its hand or its foot or whatever. And so it has no body. A baby has no body consciousness. It has soul consciousness. And within the state of soul consciousness, as we learn, is a very beautiful consciousness, because what defines soul consciousness are all these essential states of purity, innocence, bliss, spontaneity, creativity, joy, happiness, peace. And there are many of these states, and we would say that they are beyond the senses, because they are not to experience an essential state. We don't need to do that through the physical senses. In soul consciousness, we just experience that anyway, because of the experience, just being immersed in the experience of being a soul. Then what happens as we grow through our developmental stages is that things happen to us. You know, we get exposed to that very limited world that a child is exposed to. And, you know, it may be that another toddler takes our toy away from us and bashes us over the head with it. I mean, lots of things can happen. And what that is painful to a little one. Doesn't understand. Little ones don't understand, so they cry. And although basically it's nothing much at all, as these experiences happen to us, we just build up a little layer of defense so that we don't feel that pain. And so these layers of defense build up as we get older. We go to school, we're exposed to, you know, the class bully and the, you know, maybe we don't get into the cool kids group and the, you know, there's all that stuff that goes on, sorting out the social networks of childhood relationships. And apart from which, things can be going on in home with the family. And plus we're getting a lot of messages from in our childhood about how we should be, what we should be like. And, you know, you should kind of wear the right gear and have the right kind of school bag and have the right kind of friends and play the right kind of sport and live in the right kind of house, the right suburb, do the right things, have the right kind of latest $1,800 iPhone. And, you know, all this stuff goes on in childhood. And so all this gets sucked into the identity of the child. And I've seen, you know, friends of mine with quite young children who absolutely expect to have these very expensive iPhones, you know, when they're really very young. And if they don't get them, they'll, you know, raise the roof. And so all this is being subsumed into the identity of that young person, that little person. And it's all external. And so in this process of growing up, we are identifying ourselves as a body more and more and more and more and more. And what do? Well, we get attached. We get attached to things. And we want this, or I need that, or I, you know, need to look cool. I need to be one of the groovy people at school and so on. And so this is the kind of dynamic that goes on. And what this does, as this false ego or personality develops more and more and more, it creates this shell-like structure around the soul. Now, obviously, it's invisible because it's energetic, but it's as real as your flesh and blood. And I'm going to see if I can just share my screen and show you a diagram. Ooh, can any of you see this diagram? No. Down here, it's not very easy to see, is it? It's a bit subtle. But what we've in the center there is the soul. And so all of these layers have built up around the soul. And so this is this build up of layers around the soul is the false personality, or ego is the other word for it. We're back again. And so the real problem with this is, as we grow up, that we think this false construction of self, this ego, is who we truly are, because it is very good at mimicking. It mimics the soul, and it convinces us that it's who we are. And so as this false construction of the self actually lives in our mind. Now, the mind and the intellect are part of the soul, as we know. They function through our consciousness. Both our mind and our intellect are sort of part of the furniture in our consciousness. And so the ego resides in the mind, and it hijacks what we associate with as the cognitive or the thinking mind. So it actually really influences our thoughts to a massive degree. And as I was explaining, as that false self builds up and builds up and builds up over time, the basic fabric of it is fear. Because as it builds up, we disconnect over time, completely disconnect with who we truly are. And who we truly are is soul. And this loss of self is actually felt very, very deeply. And I believe it is the most painful experience that a human being has. But it's not something that we understand, in our cognitive mind. But it is felt deeply, that sense, deep sense of loss. And we bury that pain. We bury that sense of loss. And there's a wonderful psychiatrist in India. He comes from a very spiritual perspective, and he's written some incredible books. His name is Sudhir Kaka. And in one of his books, he writes that at that very core layer of ego, that layer that is closest to the soul, and that is where the split actually begins. He says at that very basic layer is a layer of depression. And it is not possible to treat a person who is depressed at that level of their being through psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. And he says the only way to help somebody who is in that level of depression is for them to take on a spiritual teacher and a spiritual teaching, i.e. meditation, and to work with their teacher. And I have to tell you that when I began to meditate in the early part of 1984, over in Los Angeles, where I was living at the time, I kind of threw myself into it. And it took 3 weeks, but I had this quite profound realization after 3 weeks that a layer of depression at the core of my being had completely dissolved. I actually had that experience. Now, I was meditating, but I had no knowledge of Raj Yoga. I had no real knowledge of anything spiritual at that point. And, but I was cognitively aware. I knew that that depression, that very deep layer of depression that I had felt for a lot of my adult life, that I could never express in words or define, had dissolved. It had gone. And there was this amazing feeling that replaced that, of freedom and lightness and happiness. And so with each of these layers that we acquire is the loss of an aspect of our essential self, of an aspect of soul. And this is where this understanding of the wholes comes in. Most of the human race, under normal circumstances, as people are under normal circumstances, are full of this, what we call wholes. And a whole refers to any part of you that has a real part of you that has been lost, meaning a part of you that you've actually lost consciousness of. And so what is left is this deep feeling of deficiency, this deep, inexpressible feeling of loss. And that is a loss of an aspect of the essential self. So what we have lost awareness of course, is our essence, our spirit. And when we're not aware of essence, of the essence that we are, it is lost to us. It is no longer in our awareness. It is lost. And although we don't kind of consciously know that we lost this part of our essence or we're disconnected from it, we feel that loss deeply. And it is felt as a sense of deficiency. And so this whole is nothing but the absence of a certain part of our essence, which is our true and real self. Now, it could be a loss of love, a loss of value, a loss of capacity for contact, a loss of strength, a loss of will, a loss of clarity or pleasure or contentment, any of the qualities of essence. And there are many of them. But when they are lost, they're gone. As far as we're concerned, they're gone. But of course, they are not actually gone, and they're certainly not gone forever. We're simply cut off from them. And one of the most beautiful, beautiful things about meditation, and one of the most important reasons to take up meditation, is that it reconnects us with those things, those parts of ourselves that we have lost. So let me give you an example. If, for instance, I'm cut off from my quality of value or self-esteem, so the actual sense of being cut off isn't there, but it's just this sense of deficiency, of a hole left inside me, an empty space, a void. And so I feel this deficiency, sense of inferiority. And so the natural response to that or reaction to that is to fill it with something. And so I want to fill it. If I'm cut off from my sense of value, my essential spiritual value, just of being a soul, then I want to get value from the outside. And so I might work very, very hard at getting approval and strokes from other people, and this is going to inform my life choices. I just want to highlight that these sense of deficiency at such a deep level shapes our life. Because I could become, in order to get this constant supply of value from the outside, I could become the world's biggest people pleaser. I could become a workaholic because I desperately want my boss or the people I work with to look up to me and approve of me and praise me and give me strokes. And of course, because I don't have it on the inside, I need a constant supply of it. It's like being an addict. I need that feel good and I need it constantly. And so, just like an addict, my holes or these deficient areas can really drive my behaviour to a huge extent and drive my life. And this is what I would call living a completely false existence. Because, this is me getting my needs met. They're not real needs. They're fake. They're phony needs. But my life can get completely adapted to trying to get these needs met. It may be that I want, work my guts out around the house, cooking and baking and cleaning and, looking after the kids and whatever to get them to love me. I can, expend all this energy. If I don't believe I'm lovable internally, then I've got to get this from the outside all the time. And I can really knock myself around getting it. So I'm not really aware of these holes. What I'm aware of is desires. I want this praise. I want to be really successful so that people will acknowledge me and think I'm fantastic, because I don't. And I want this person to love me, or I want this particular experience of fullness somewhere. And so the presence of needs and desires indicates the presence of a particular hole. And, these holes, of course, do originate during our childhood as a result of what I'm just going to call conflicts with the environment. So that's any conflict I have with people, places, or things outside myself. Maybe my parents didn't value me. Maybe they didn't treat me as though my wishes or my presence were important. Presence is a very important aspect of soul. We all have presence. Everyone has presence. And when presence is very rich and very full and very connected, then my presence, when I walk into a room, I won't have to speak. I don't know how many of you met or can recall the head of the Brahma Kumaris, Daddy Kumaka or Daddy Prakashmani. When she walked into a room, her presence filled the room. Could be a huge room with hundreds of people in it, but her presence filled that room. It was extraordinary. And so presence is it is part of soul. It is part of who we are. And if my wishes or my presence were not important in my family, they didn't act in ways that let me know I mattered. Maybe they ignored my essential value. And because my value was not seen or acknowledged, maybe even attacked or discouraged, I got cut off from that part of me. And what's left, basically, is a hole. And so I am then going to go into my life. I leave home, where I develop this sense of deficiency, and I go out into the world driven by a need to feel I matter, that I'm important, and that, my presence is valuable and is real. And this, this will define how I live, my choice of what I do, the people I have around me, my partner or partners, it will define me to an absolutely huge extent. And so, I grow up, I leave home, I go out into the world, and then at some point, when I relate to another human being in a deep way, and the deeper this relating is, then the more this will happen. I can begin to fill my voids with the other person. And I feel valued because this person appreciates me. And that feels incredible because I never got that at home when I was growing up. It just feels amazing. And I don't consciously know that I'm filling those voids in myself with this other person, and with their appreciation of me. But actually, that's what I'm doing. And I feel full when I'm with that person. I feel complete. I feel whole. I don't feel the void anymore. I feel whole and I feel happy. And when I'm with that person, I feel valuable. I feel worthy. But unconsciously, there is a kind of knowing that that other person has my value. And the other person not only makes me feel good, feel valuable, but whatever they're giving me is a part of me. And so is part of that fullness that I experience. And so this is where I can then, the boundaries get blurred. And how often have I heard people say, I've even, honestly, in my much younger days, I said it myself. We were a half a person and a half a person till we met, and now we're one whole. Because it's a reciprocal interaction. And so when we meet someone where there's a good fit, and people will use that, a good fit, and that means I've met someone who is really able to identify and, in a sense, fill my holes, and I can identify and fill theirs. And the more expert we are at doing this, then the more I'm going to feel, oh, I've met my soulmate. You know, this is the person I've been waiting for all my life. And it feels so good. It's just this perfect fit. And, but of course, unconsciously, I don't see the part of the person that makes me feel my value as separate from me. I see it as part of me. So what I'm getting from that other person, I feel as part, I feel it to be part of me. And this is why when our intimate partner, whoever they may be, dies or leaves, or maybe something happens to them or the relationship ends, I don't feel like I'm losing that person. I feel that I'm losing part of myself, because energetically they've taken their energy and their whatever it was I was getting from them with them. If they have died, then their energy is no longer in my energy field. And this is why death of a loved one, can be a parent, you know, it can be anybody, brings up so much pain and suffering and grief and loss. And so the loss of the person is not felt as a loss of a separate person. I feel like I've lost a whole chunk of me. And I've heard people say this so often. I feel gutted. I feel as though my heart has been cut out. I feel as though a whole part of my body is empty. And unconsciously, I saw parts of that person as feeling part of me. And now I'm really feeling it. And very often one of the things people do when they lose their partner or a loved one is, instead of dealing with the grief and the loss and the pain, of working through that process and coming to terms with the loss of that person, but also what that's about is the recovery of the parts of myself that I have lost. And I'm going to tell you how we do that in a minute. Someone may go off. Rather than go through that process, which they find terribly painful, yes, it is painful, but it is part of our spiritual growth. And in order to recover our spiritual self, our spiritual connection with ourselves, we actually need to go through that pain and understand. You know, we lost sight, we lost the sense of the fact that we were two separate people. You know, we felt merged. We felt that I was half a person, they were half a person, and together we made up a whole person. It's actually impossible to do that. We just get that feeling when we start filling those voids. So what people will do rather than go through the grief is they go and find another person to fill all those voids straight away. And rather than, go through the grieving process and the adjustment and the recovery of self. And I repeat, it is so important to do that because we grow so much from that. A person who has gone through their grief, and the deeper the grief, honestly, the more this happens. Because the more of ourself we recover, and we will come out of that grieving a much deeper person, a person who now wants to discover meaning in their life and understand the spiritual meaning of loss and grief. I will be a much more empathic and compassionate person in terms of my relationships with others, because now I can really relate to other people's pain. And this is very important in this life. I remember, I don't know if all of you knew Daddy Janky, but I knew her very, very well for many, many decades. And I remember her saying, at one point she was in America with us, and I was in my early years of meditating and my affiliation with BK. And I remember someone asked her a question, and it was, I can't remember the question, but I remember how judgmental the question was. I just remember it being really judgmental about other people, and it was about other people's pain and feelings. And I remember her saying, well, if you can't relate to and connect with other people's pain, how can you help anyone? How can you do service? How can you help yourself? And I was so glad to hear her say that. And, it's so true. Daddy Janky went through a great deal in her pre-Brahman existence, and certainly again as a BK. She went through a hell of a lot. And, she would talk about, it, not a great deal, but I certainly in those early days she did, and I knew. But what it did for me was it made her human for me, made her human, and I knew that I could trust her. Because what kind of relationship are you going to have with someone who's never felt any pain? It's not, it's not real. And so one of the things I used to do in my earlier days on this spiritual journey was that, and it happened by accident, totally by accident, but I was sort of how long had I been meditating? Probably between 7 and 9 years at this point. But now it's nearly 40. But I had this absolute urge. I was at work and I had this absolute urge. I remember it was a Saturday. I had this driving urge to call this friend of mine who lived near me and go to a movie. And, you know, it was like a very demanding urge. And I finished work and all the time I was working, I was thinking, oh, I've got to go and I've got to, you know, as soon as I finish work, I will call this friend of mine. And then I finished work and I thought, I don't know what's really going on. So I waited and I went home and I thought, this is sort of interesting. I think I'll just meditate on it. And I sat down and meditated. And what happened was that I went through that urge, you know, to go to a movie with this friend. I got underneath that and I started to feel pain. And I sat there and I thought, let me go into this. And I went into the pain. And eventually, I sat there for hours and I got a memory, a childhood memory. And it was a memory of rejection. And when I got that memory, the whole thing dissolved, completely dissolved. It was the energy. Now, I had a great, what was going on with me was that desire I had to go to the movies was a desire to distract myself from this feeling that was sitting under the surface, this feeling of rejection. Now, what happens when we're meditators on a regular daily basis, when it's part of our lifestyle, meditation brings things up. It has to, you know, that's the cleansing process, the healing process. So whatever's sitting down there that's repressed has got to come up into consciousness so that we can process it and deal with it. And so when this memory came up, I shed a few tears. But it literally was only a few, and then I let it go. It was gone. And so that void completely went. And I kept doing this because I realised I was onto something. And I would feel so good after I would have the realisation or the memory or I'd get to the bottom of what this void was about. It freed me. It was liberation. And I was getting part of my lost self back. I was feeling more whole. Over time, I was feeling more whole. And so what I discovered was the importance of feeling the whole, not filling. And so very often when something is coming up and is below consciousness, and it may be something from our childhood or something from an earlier part of our life that we have repressed because it was painful or we did not want to deal with it, And this is how ego works. Ego doesn't want to deal with this stuff. It's the ego that represses stuff that we don't want to face. So what happened was that I realized I'd hit on a really good technique here for getting myself back. And that the way when something repressed was coming close to the surface, I would feel a need, an urgent need or desire to distract myself in some way, like go to the movies, call a friend, you know. It was all about distraction and keeping that thing repressed so I don't have to deal with it. But of course, once we're on the spiritual journey, we've got to deal with this stuff. We don't grow. We don't free ourselves. We don't clean house internally. And when you're a meditator, you've got to clean house, because meditation is cleaning house. It brings anything that's repressed, it will bring up. Meditation does that because it purifies us. And so this is how I discovered I could work on myself. It's self-therapy, and it's, you know, it's very, very simple. And what I would do afterwards was go and talk to someone about what had just happened. And I found that, you know, you've got to choose the right person to talk to, of course. But I found that other people were very interested. My friends who were, you know, really looking at themselves, they were very interested, only too happy to have a discussion of this nature. And it's good once you go through it to talk about it, because then once you talk about it, you learn from it even more. And, you know, talk to your friends, you can share, or your colleagues, you can share experiences around this. And so there's even more understanding, more awareness, and more growth from it. And this is a very deep process of healing, because whatever has been repressed for a reason, and that's because it's painful. And I use the word painful in very broad terms, and I would say that our emotions are either painful or happy. And so there'd be those two categories that you put them in. And so to put this very briefly, we lose consciousness of part of our essence, and we lose awareness of that part of ourself, the loss of love or value or capacity for contact or presence or strength, will, clarity, security. We get a feeling of deficiency or inferiority or loss of self-esteem. And what covers that up, and this is how ego works, is what will cover up a feeling of inferiority may be a feeling of superiority. I put myself above others. And then I get a desire or a need which will point me to the presence of the whole. It covers up a rising feeling, an emotion of jealousy, bitterness, anger, rejection, inferiority, hatred, possessiveness. And I can see another person in my life who I'm close to as an extension of myself, as filling me. I see them as part of me. And I know subconsciously that they have my value. And if I lose them, if they go away or they die, something happens, then I now feel that I've lost my value again. And so this is where I can really go into that hole and reconnect with my essence. And over time, when I continue to do this, work on myself in this way, I regain more and more essence. And the result of that is that I have less and less emotion. Because, and here's the vital difference between feelings and emotions. Emotions are produced by the central nervous system. They are energy. And they are reactions. So they come from the ego. They are produced through the ego influenced mind and through the central nervous system. Whereas a feeling and the emotions are always reactions to something or someone. Whereas a feeling is connected to my essence, to my true self. And so when I'm in my essential state of peace or love or bliss or presence or contentment, when I'm manifesting that essential state, I feel peaceful. And that feeling is not dependent on something that's happening in the environment, that, my partner's making me feel good, or my boss, or my friend, or my dog, or whatever, that I'm getting what I need to fill that hole. It is simply the feeling of being myself, my essence. So feelings come from my essential state. And that is the difference between a feeling and an emotion. And so the key here is to feel the hole, not fill the hole, to go into the hole, feel it to its fullest extent. We need to do that because most people will defend like crazy against feeling the hole, feeling the void. Because the ego tells us, don't go in there. Go to the movies. Go and get drunk. Go and eat some chocolate. Go and watch television. Go and work out at the gym. Go and do anything. Don't feel that. And in our spiritual work, we have to. We have to disregard that message, that very persuasive message of ego, and do our work. And I call it work because that's what it is. And this is how we will completely lose a memory of what fear actually is. I remember when I came back from America, I came back in about at the end of the 80s, about 89, end of 89. And I remember talking to some people who'd been meditating in the BK family. for decades, much longer than I had. Well, not a lot longer but longer than I had, shall we say. And I said to them, I was doing a little bit of anecdotal research. If I encountered a senior or a daddy, I'd ask them this question: do you ever feel fear? And they would smile at me very warmly, usually, and say, no, I don't. It's gone. And I remember these people saying to me, what has replaced it? Any sense of, I talked about a sense of deficiency, and so they said, no, it's all gone. And what has replaced it is this unreal feeling of confidence and self-reliance. And it's not about the ego. And I would say I have that feeling myself, where I know I can rely totally on myself and my relationship with Baba. That provides the nourishment and the stability and the protection and safety in every sense of the word that I really need. And I was talking to somebody over Christmas, because there was, with the COVID and lockdowns and various things happening in the world, and the economy, the world economy looking shaky, and, various things happening globally. And of course, now it's even worse. And the person I was talking to was expressing a great deal of fear about these things. And a little after that, I went and I had some meditation. And what came to me very clearly in meditation was what I was going to tell that person. And what it was just keep your intellect connected to God, and you will be protected automatically. And I know this is true. And when we do this, particularly the longer that we do it, there's nothing to be afraid of. I know that the world has changed so much in the last month, and even the last 2 weeks. And there are all kinds of things that we can read into this. But we have to have faith in our spiritual understanding of how things really are. And that draws us into this place of safety, of ultimate safety and protection, that no matter what happens, I am protected, because I've got the director of this drama watching out for me, watching my back. And I've got that soul is not going to let anything happen to me. And I completely believe that. Are we meant to live our life in fear? I don't think so. What's the point? And so I call this talk Embracing Fear. But really what it's about is embracing our true self and believing in our practice, our spiritual practice, as the ultimate source of everything that we can ever need or want in this life. And that no one can take it away from us, because it's not a, it's not a car, it's not a bank account, it's not a physical thing. But it's there. And it will always be there. And so as we fill these holes and these voids in ourselves and regain ourselves more and more completely, all those layers around the soul, as we meditate, we burn those layers, we dissolve them, and they disappear until eventually we're left again with just the pure, innocent, beautiful, spontaneous, contented, peaceful, loving, blissful soul that we truly are, our true self, completely uncovered. And this is the point of our spiritual life, to become this again, to rediscover who we truly are and to become this completely. And because meditation opens our consciousness, it opens our awareness, it reconnects all of our spiritual organs. So we reintegrate ourselves, we reconnect with who we truly are, and it makes us really powerful. And as we become more powerful, we lose all the fear. It just dissolves into thin air. Now, I've gone a bit over time, but would anybody like to ask me a question? And if you would, just unmute yourself. So no questions? Okay. Then let's finish with a minute of silence. So we'll just have some meditation. I won't play music over Zoom because it sounds dreadful, but I might just speak a few thoughts. So I draw my energy within. Into that very important part of me that I call my heart. And I let go of my mind and my thoughts. And I go deeply where the energy pulls me. Right into the core of my being, my heart. Feel silence stillness, drawing me, pulling me. Into this deep river of love. And this is how it feels to be me. The love just emanates. As I draw myself deeper and deeper. Into the silence, feeling the fullness, feeling the power fill me. Every atom of my being is being filled with love. I fill myself with the light. And I become light. I am strong. And I am complete in this consciousness. The consciousness of wholeness fills me. Shanti.
Shanti.
Okay, we'll be back next week with another very interesting topic. I'm not sure what it is yet, but it will go on.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Loved
Okay.
it. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.